Our first brave speaker tonight is Adam Kellerman. Adam's challenges started at 13 years old when he was diagnosed with bone cancer in his hip. Following years of treatment, he experienced chronic pain, depression, and felt that his life was meaningless. You might have seen Adam in the Jewish news or on TV, representing Australia at wheelchair tennis. In London in 2012, then again in Rio in 2016. In 2018, Adam hung up his wheelchair and raised funds to walk the Kokoda Trail. But as often is the case, in the face of these successes, what we didn't see was the numbness and the disconnectedness that Adam began to feel. Adam's journey of finding meaning while healing physically, emotionally, and spiritually is all too familiar. I hope the story of overcoming adversity inspires you. It's important to note that Adam's story touches on suicide. Please welcome Adam Kellerman.
This is the hardest speech that I've ever written. Usually when I give talks, I ask the organizer what their focus is for the conference, or what they would like their audience to walk away with. With this one, I was asked, what do I want to say that makes me feel vulnerable? There it is, that word that makes me want to run and hide. I grew up in a loving and supportive family with my mum, dad, and brothers. I was a natural sportsman, and my dream was to play soccer for Australia. The worst thing that happened to me growing up was being teased a little bit by guys at school. Madam, I'm Adam, they used to say, or look at his big ears. That's the best they could do. A few months after my 13th birthday, I was playing soccer, running up the field, when a terrible pain struck my right leg like a bolt of lightning. I was helped off the field, not knowing that it would be my last soccer match. A week later, I was standing in the radiologist's office as he pointed at the scan to a tumour about the size of a tennis ball. Mum was crying. I was scared, but I wanted to be strong. A bone biopsy confirmed it was bone cancer in my right hip. In one of the first appointments with the oncologist, we were told the treatment protocol, and then he proceeded to check my testicles to see if the cancer spread. He spoke about freezing sperm as I just hit puberty. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I felt uncomfortable and unprepared for everything that was about to happen. Chemotherapy was horrible and made me feel so weak. It took 2 weeks to recover from each round, and before going home, they'd injected me with something that made my whole body very painful to touch for 24 hours. There were 14 rounds of chemo planned with a major operation in between. The night before surgery, I was so scared, I packed a bag and tried to run away. They removed the bones of my right hip. They literally took them out, irradiated them outside of my body, and then reinserted them with a partial hip replacement. I'll never forget when my parents told me that during the operation, they were walking around waiting and saw a doctor holding an esky with my hip bones inside on their way to be irradiated on the building across the road. When I woke up, I was disoriented and heard screaming. I looked around. There were beeping machines and tubes connected to my body. I realized I was the one screaming as they put me back to sleep. I was on bed rest for 6 weeks. I couldn't get up to go to the toilet. I had no hope for life. I just wanted it all to be over. My family helped me through, particularly my baby bro. We celebrated his first birthday while I was in hospital. I wanted to live to see him grow up. My amazing parents were an incredible support team. They still are. They're here tonight. We've been through a lot together. They never let me spend a night alone in hospital. I wouldn't have had the will to survive without them. After 6 weeks, I expected to get up and be back on the soccer field. But when I started walking, I could only stand for 1 second before the pain was too excruciating. I was disheartened. Progress was slow. Each step was painful, and I still had 10 rounds of chemotherapy to get through. Each round of chemo left me weaker than the last, and right before the finish line, I was walking when suddenly a piece of my pelvis broke. It was an infection. 3 weeks and 1 round of chemo to go turned into another 2 years in and out of hospital. 20 operations, lots of IV antibiotics. They were trying to save the joint, but eventually they had to remove everything and create what they call a false joint from the remaining scar tissue, which is what I've been walking on ever since. Sometimes the hardest part about being in pain is being seen in pain. Throughout my treatment, I buried my head in computer games as an escape from my very challenging reality. It gave me a sense of purpose and competition, as well as a safe way to connect while staying invisible. Eventually, I returned to school. I was 16. I felt like an alien. I couldn't relate to my peers. I was really struggling, but I didn't talk about it. I suffered in silence. I remember one day walking up the stairs on crutches with my books under my arm. I dropped them all. A friend rushed over to help, but I didn't let him. I was trying to be strong and hold it together. I told him I could do it myself. It was around this time that I was doing my best to stay connected to Judaism, but I had a lot of questions for Hashem. Like, why did this happen to me? Why did I survive, and what was I supposed to do now? Walking home from a Shabbat lunch, I remember it being a painful walk. I didn't see a slippery patch of gravel and fell. A rage welled up in me, and from that point forward, I turned my back on all things related to Judaism. It's hard to describe that time in my life. I survived the cancer, but I was miserable, not really living. My parents would offer me different activities to try to get me outside, to socialize and get away from computer games. The only one I became interested in was wheelchair tennis. The first time I sat in the wheelchair on the tennis court, I felt a spark of life, which reignited my childhood dream of being a professional sportsman. That led to an incredible career, traveling to 25 different countries. I played for Australia in 2 Paralympics, 10 World Championships, and reached a career high ranking of 8 in the world. I had moments of happiness when I would win a tournament, for example. But despite my outward success, inside, I still felt this numbness. I thought something must be wrong with me. There was a deep emotional wound that was hidden from everyone, including myself. I'd been doing everything I possibly could to avoid being in pain, but it didn't seem to matter what I did. One of my mentors tried to tell me it's okay to feel what you're feeling, but it didn't feel okay. It felt scary, empty, and lonely. I was also in a lot of physical pain. For a number of years, I'd been using a wheelchair to move around for any distance further than 100 meters because it was very painful to walk. I didn't want to take any medication because of how it made me feel mentally. I found a mindful movement teacher to help my tennis career, and as a bonus, I learned to change my relationship with pain. It was a long process and took a lot of work. He helped me to identify thought, emotion, and physical patterns, and in essence, rewire them so that I could move more freely to pursue my goals. Following this, an incredible opportunity arrived unexpectedly when I was in Africa doing some philanthropic work for a charity supporting people with disabilities and wheelchair tennis teams. I was challenged to walk the Kokoda Track to raise money for charity. Everyone thought I was crazy, including me. I put my wheelchair in storage and trained for 15 months. I completed the 140-kilometer steep, slippery, muddy track in November 2018 with a team of 11 that included my dad. I felt an incredible sense of achievement, but when the emotional numbness followed, I started questioning, what was the point? I went back to training for the 2020 Tokyo Paralympics, but I didn't feel the spark anymore. I didn't want to spend any more time in a wheelchair, so I retired. The very same night, I had a panic attack for the first time, and for the subsequent year, I had flashbacks of being in hospital, preparing for chemo and surgery. I experienced depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts on a higher level than I had ever felt before. I plunged into uncertainty and tried to put my mentor's advice into practice by allowing myself to feel it all, without avoiding, without trying to change or fix it. My parents were concerned. I reassured them that I needed to trust this process and believed wholeheartedly that I would be okay. There were years of trauma and repressed emotions to get through. It was frustrating, and I wanted it to go faster. I also started noticing increased levels of physical discomfort, which was the cherry on top of a stack of pain and discomfort. I meditated a lot in that time. I went to a silent retreat in the Blue Mountains and another retreat in Peru. I also trained for 40 days with a Chinese master of a movement system similar to Tai Chi. Withdrawing from everyday life in this way helped me to process the past and to build new foundations to move forward. I learned that no matter how uncomfortable I was feeling, I could take a step back and observe my experience from a state of relative peace and non-attachment. The anger I felt towards Hashem when I was 16 returned to my awareness. I had a lot of resistance to engaging with Judaism again, but one day I felt inspired to put on my tefillin. I don't know what I was expecting, but it was a big letdown. I didn't feel connected at all. I gave it a few tries and was ready to conclude that it just wasn't for me, but before I was completely done with it, someone told me to get it checked by a scribe. It turns out there was an uncommon mistake in one of the words. The word in Hebrew is overlechtecha, which means, and when you walk. When we found out, I couldn't help but laugh. Mum got angry and started looking for the person we got the tefillin from. When I put on the kosher tefillin for the first time, I felt connected to Hashem for the first time in my adult life. Since then, my faith and connection to Judaism has flourished, and I've recently returned from 4 months studying in yeshiva in Jerusalem. A few months after my tefillin, I also received news from my surgeon that there is new technology which makes it possible to have a hip reconstruction. They're now able to 3D print titanium joints. At first, I said I wasn't interested. I was scared to have another hip operation. After taking some time to process it, I feel strongly that this is an incredible opportunity to reduce the pain and enhance my quality of life moving forward. I'm waiting for confirmation on a date for surgery. Usually when I give a talk, I finish with something uplifting or inspiring. Tonight, I'd like to say that it's not always about turning a negative into a positive. It's about seeing that good and bad, pleasure and pain, light and dark, they're all a part of life. It takes bravery to be true to yourself, to be okay feeling what you're feeling, to be vulnerable, and to face the totality of life and accept it as it is. I want to honor all the people who are in pain and doing their best in this human experience. I also want to thank everyone who has helped me and all those people who are helping others to heal, learn, grow, and actively put energy towards creating a better, more peaceful world.